Hello, I am Farah Guerrero, and this is the Blue Hour on CITR 101.9 FM at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Long before museums, universities, and radio, these lands were places of learning, storytelling, artistic expression, and careful listening. It is a privilege to gather here today in that same spirit. My guest today is Dr. Curtis Collins. Few museums directors have experienced Canada's artistic and cultural life as broadly as Curtis Collins. Over more than 3 decades, he has led galleries, museums, and arts institutions across 6 provinces and 1 territory, from Fredericton to Dawson City, from Regina to Whistler, while also teaching at universities across the country and helping shape major exhibitions, publications, and public programs devoted to Canadian art. Since 2018, Curtis has served as Executive Director of the Audain Art Museum, where he has overseen a remarkable period of growth through exhibitions including Wolves, the Art of Dempsey Bob, Curve, Women Carvers on the Northwest Coast, the Coast Mountains, recent works by Edvard Burtynsky and Karin Bubaš, Gardens of Shadows. He is also the co-author of the recent publication Sidansu James Hart, a Monumental Practice, a landmark study of one of Canada's foremost Indigenous artists. Today I'd like to do something a little different. Rather than simply discussing exhibitions, I'd like to spend this hour getting to know the person behind them, the curator, educator, and museum leader whose career has quietly helped shape the way Canadians encounter art. Curtis, welcome to the Blue Hour.
Thank you, Farah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your career has taken you through galleries, universities, and many institutions across much of Canada. What have those different regions taught you about this country's artistic life?
Well, I think that each region, its geography, its people, its history, determines the quality of art that is produced from that place. And I've always been highly interested in Canadian art and how it's evolved and how it's changed and continues to move forward. And so it's been important for me to experience all these different locations as a way of anticipating a larger, I would say, multifaceted Canadian identity.
Now, in 2018, you landed yourself at the Audain Art Museum in Whistler, and it may be the longest place you've been to date.
Short of my hometown, the answer is yes.
Yes. Now, you became director and chief curator at that time. And so how did you first become a candidate for the position, and what drew you to coming to Whistler?
I was teaching at MacEwan University in Edmonton, which is a new university in the cultural management section, and enjoying that position. However, having bounced back and forth between academia and public and private institutions, I was missing the celebratory aspect that comes along with the public responsibility of museums and galleries. And I was on a flight from Minneapolis to Edmonton, surfing the net, and saw the Audain Art Museum posting. So I was already in the position of working towards becoming a tenure track professor at MacEwan, and this opportunity popped up, literally. And I thought I just wanted to explore that possibility. So the next day I called the management consultant firm that was doing the search and indicated that I felt as though I had excellent qualifications for the position and that I would send them a cover letter and a CV by the end of the week, to which they responded, "Make that tomorrow. The competition is closing." So I did.
And here you are.
And here I am, yes.
Now, the Audain at the time had opened only 2 years prior to you arriving. So when you arrived, what possibilities did you see in such a young museum?
Well, it was a fascinating start in the fact that the posting that I responded to was for a director. Upon arriving, or shortly after the announcement of me taking over as director, and a few months prior to my arrival, the chief curator at that time had resigned. So they called me back and said, "Just so you know, you'll be without a chief curator when you arrive." And then my recommendation was that I could be director and chief curator, and that upon arriving, I would oversee the hiring of a curator. And so that's, in fact, how it played out. And one of the reasons for my suggestion was I think it's important that if you're a good director, you have to have a sound curatorial base within the context of an art museum. And I'll be quite candid, the curating is the fun stuff. And so I thought that this would be a nice complementary way to continue my curatorial efforts and while leading what is a unique entity in Canada in the fact that the Audain Art Museum is a privately founded and privately funded institution that collects. There's no other equivalent in Canada. It does mimic, to a certain extent, a more American model of institutions. I can think of many, the Barnes Foundation, for example. And as I'm sure you know, and many of your listeners, it's in Whistler. And I'm, I would say, a relatively outdoorsy kind of fella. And I do love to ski and cycle and swim and all those things. So it seemed like a real ideal fit for me.
And when you say swim, you swim in the lakes in Whistler, is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. I live on Alta Lake, and every morning before I go to work, I swim across the lake and back, and then cycle on the Valley Trail that goes around the lake and through the forest to the museum. So it's I would say, an idyllic start to the day.
Now, the Audain Museum just celebrated its 10th anniversary earlier this year. And since then, you're now Category A museum as well. It was a designation shortly after you arrived, which is amazing. But how do you feel looking back at what is really most of the museum's life? You've been part of it. and how do you see your time there, and what has evolved into something that is now in many ways a part of Whistler's identity?
When I parachuted in, the museum had all the parts to be, a space of national consequence and an important leader in British Columbia. It was just a matter of assembling those parts, both with regards to building the collection and developing a program of special exhibitions. And I think the essential part was to pursue both those objectives within a Whistler context. Mm-hmm. And so one of the first things that we did was we were having 3 major exhibitions a year in our primary exhibition space, the Tom and Teresa Gautreaux galleries, and that seemed not quite a good fit for Whistler. And so we relatively quickly evolved to having one major summer exhibition and one major winter exhibition. And then we also have a really beautiful upstairs space, currently called the Upstairs Gallery, which will be soon redesignated as the Gordon Smith Mezzanine. And that was also a really fascinating space in the sense that it had the best reflection of what is quite an astounding piece of architecture within an interior context. Mm-hmm. So the formula that we maintain today is that we'll open up a show in the fall and the spring in the upstairs space, which are traditionally the shoulder seasons in Whistler, and then offset by major exhibitions downstairs in the winter and summer, as I mentioned. So that was really, it took us, I'd say a year or two to get to that formula, because I inherited exhibitions that had been planned in advance of my arrival. And then the other trick to it was when negotiating with major institutions, the National Gallery of Canada, the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, we negotiated in a way that we had longer run exhibitions. Mm-hmm. Most exhibitions of consequence usually go around 3 months. And we insisted that every show that we have run 4.5 months. Mm-hmm. And again, which was part of tuning our programming to the Whistler experience. So that was really important. The other thing that was gradual was, I would say, the quality of our exhibitions was good at the time when I arrived, but wasn't excellent. And part of being able to hit that excellent level was securing our Category A status from Heritage Canada, which entails a very lengthy application. You have to have 2 years worth of heat, humidity, security records before you can get this status. But once you have it, you can borrow works of art from anywhere in the world. And that was a real turning point for the museum. And the exhibition that marked that turning point was the Jean-Paul Riopelle exhibition from the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal. Yes. That was a threshold moment for the museum. Yeah. I'm going to say 5 years ago, and we never looked back.
Yeah. And you've had, no doubt, extraordinary exhibitions in this last decade, and some very well-known people beyond Riopelle, who is very well-known in Canada and beyond Canada, but also people like Picasso and Edgar Degas and Edvard Munch, and I could name many others. And of course, the incredible Canadian artists that have made it through. So do you feel that your coming and landing at the Audain, given that you had been in so many different places in Canada, brought a unique set of skill set to bring to Whistler?
I have a very particular perspective on the Canadian art scene, having, as you mentioned, lived in, I think it's 14 different cities in Canada, but I'll have to count at one point. And that's also enabled me to develop a really extensive network of both artists and curators. I remember very clearly about, I'm going to say within a month of arriving, I called Dempsey Bob. And I had known Dempsey since the late 80s. And I said, "Hi, Dempsey, I got this great gig. Would you like an exhibition?" He's like, "Sure." And that was pretty much, I said, "Okay." And then at that time, the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, just north of Toronto in Kleinburg, had also been speaking with Dempsey. And so I called up their director, Sarah Milroy, and said, "Why don't we join forces and mount this major retrospective of Dempsey's work along with a publication?" I had opened in Whistler. There was 120 pieces, and then a slightly smaller version then toured to the Glenbow in Calgary, the McMichael in Toronto, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, and then it wound up at the Kelowna Art Gallery. And that was the most extensive exhibition that Dempsey had ever had in his entire career. And the works spanned from the early 80s to the present. And so we were able to secure a really nice variety of pieces, both from private and public collections. And there were two really important works that were very much a struggle to obtain, but through determination. There was a piece called The Smart One, which was a mask that I saw in 1992 at the National Gallery of Canada. And Dempsey insisted that no retrospective of his work would be complete without it. Wow. I tracked it down to a storage area in the San Juan Islands, to an old fella that had been gifted it. And through numerous phone calls over the course of, I'm going to say, 2 years, he wanted to lend it, and then he didn't, then he was, then he didn't, and then how we were going to get it. And then I hired a courier to go to the San Juan Islands, pick it up, get it across the border, at which point it was in Vancouver. I drove to Vancouver, put it in the front seat of my truck, strapped it down, and as I was driving up the Sea to Sky, I phoned Dempsey, and he was elated. It was 5 days before the exhibition opening, so it was a fairly pressure-cooked situation. But I can't begin to tell you how satisfying it was to know that we had honored Dempsey and his career, but particularly this pivotal work.
Yes. And I know some inside information. You were just in Alaska.
Yes, I was.
With?
Dempsey Bob.
There you go. Which we'll talk about. Let's not go too fast forward, because that's something to come. We still want to talk about what's happened in the last 10 years, if we can even do that. But yeah, so your connections that brought you to the Audain were extraordinarily helpful. Your knowledge of Canadian art. I would also add you as an educator, as someone that comes from a scholarly background. You've got a PhD from McGill, and so you're bringing all of these things into the museum. And certainly, we're going to talk about how some of that knowledge has manifested itself over the years. But there's no doubt that there's something interesting to see these connections with the Audain across the country. So I was just at the National Gallery of Canada this past spring, and I missed one of the exhibitions actually in Whistler called Curve, but sure enough, there it was at the National Gallery of Canada. So I got to see it, and it was still in partnership with the Audain, and it was really nice to see the Audain in Ottawa, right? So that's where the Audain is. It certainly means that it's moved beyond the boundaries of a mountain town, which is amazing. Would you say that the Audain Art Museum is a world-class museum?
Absolutely. The quality of the special exhibitions that we mount are second to none. And as you mentioned, major European, major Asian, major North American artists, I would say we've been able to feature through the last 10 years. And it's interesting now that anytime any major institutions, let's say the National Gallery of Canada, the McMichael, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, are touring an exhibition, I get the first call when they want to come west. And so that, again, was a gradual process. And it's always very interesting when curators and or directors come from institutions in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Halifax. I think they think they're coming to a log cabin in the mountains. And when they arrive, they're pleasantly surprised. And then they're even more impressed by the quality of what we are able to do with a very small staff, but an incredible building designed by John and Patricia Patkow here in Vancouver. And similarly, Michael Audain and Yoshika Karasawa have been endlessly supportive. And every Tuesday morning, this morning included, at 9:30, I have a 1-hour meeting with Michael and a 1-page agenda that goes through everything from finance to marketing. But ultimately, the most important part of the agenda is about the collection and our curatorial efforts.
And Michael Audain is the great patron and founder of the museum, so that's nice. You mentioned Tuesday. So something happened during the pandemic, which became actually really popular. Tuesday night talks, they were called T&T. And so these were conversations. This is where you were the interviewer and you were interviewing extraordinary artists. And it was a really great way to keep up with the activities of the museum, to keep the public engaged in the museum. Do you want to bring us back to those talks?
Sure. It was a fascinating time. So we did 3 seasons of TNT and 1 special episode. And again, not long after I had arrived, COVID hit. And many museums and galleries, in fact all, were scrambling. Because nobody knew what to do. Our doors closed, and it was a very trying time, both personally and professionally. However, those moments also present opportunities. And the Tuesday Night Talk series came out of a canceled studio visit with Ian Wallace. And he was the first episode ever. And so I called Ian and said, sorry, COVID's on. I can't do studio visits. And then I said, Ian, how about we talk over Zoom, and then people can key in and watch our talk. You'll be in your studio. I'll be in the museum, sitting in front of one of your works that's in the collection. And he thought that was a fantastic idea. And then the other layer to this was, again, when the museum was closed, we wanted to keep some kind of marketing presence, particularly on Instagram. And the other thing was that we split shifts in the museum during COVID. So I had the night shift. And during COVID, there was a smash and grab of a Van Gogh painting in Amsterdam.
Yes, that's right.
And the next day I had my Tuesday morning meeting with Michael, and he was very concerned about the museum's security, and rightfully so. Yeah. And so just in our conversation, I said, tell you what, Michael, every night before I leave, I'll walk through the museum with a flashlight and make sure everything's okay. And he was a bit taken back by that offer. He said, you'd do that? And I said, absolutely. So he did. So I did, rather. And then as I was going through the museum, literally with a flashlight, I started taking photographs on my phone. And so you'd see an Emily Carr painting with the ring of the light around it. Or you'd see a Jeff Wall photograph with the ring of the light around it, or a Vicky Alexander. And then I started sending these to our marketing person at the time, Justine Nickel, and she said, these are fantastic. And so we started an Instagram series before TNT, which were called the Director's Security Tours, which were really popular. And so so we combined the two. And again, when I'm sitting in the museum, we lit it using a flashlight and me connecting to artists in their studio, not only in British Columbia, but also in Montreal, in Toronto, depending where the artists were living at the time. And there were some real memorable moments, part of which were part of the technical glitches of getting a new thing off the ground. At one point, during the Paul Wong interview, somebody texted him and it cut out our sound because we were running the sound through his phone at that moment. So that's as much as we could figure out at the time. And so there was a pause in the program. And Paul was great. Paul is a wonderful fella. And he's like, oh, I had to go to the bathroom. We're back. So that was quite special. One time, and again, it was the time factor, because we started at 8 p.m. and that was very deliberate, and it was live. And it reminded me of when I was a kid with kind of old school television viewing habits. And I recall very clearly my parents would sit down at certain days of the week at very specific times to watch their program. And I thought, I need to mimic that somehow so people know, oh, it's Tuesday, a little bit after dinner, 8 o'clock, you have maybe a port or a whiskey or lemonade, what have you. And so you can sort of, sit back, relax, and just enjoy whatever the feature artist was that week and get to know some really concentrated information about that artist's practice and the specific piece in our collection. And I say that because the museum, in a larger context, offers a very concentrated experience. I often refer to it as a boutique museum. So TNT had that boutique feel to it. There was another interview where I was interviewing Attila Richard Lukács. And he's a fairly shy guy, and he's quiet, a really nice fella. But then at one moment he goes, do you mind if I have a smoke? I went, go for it. He lit up a cigarette, and then suddenly he was so relaxed, and he was sitting in this really nice upholstered chair, and the interview was fantastic. And I've seen other interviews with artists where, you can't expect that artists are necessarily outgoing or want to talk about their work. So that was always the challenge, to get them to loosen up and feel comfortable. And for the show to be this very anecdotal, offhand, relaxed discussion of art, which would be accessible to a very broad audience. And I knew that something was happening, I'm going to say somewhere into the 4th or 5th episode. I started getting stopped in the grocery store saying, I saw TNT last night. Way to go. And I thought, I was really very flattered.
You might have to bring that back.
As long as COVID doesn't come with it.
Tuesday night, exactly. But you have resolved something about you patrolling with the flashlight. If I'm not mistaken, you have someone that does that now full time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's time to move to some of these artists.
Sure.
And there's one that I will confess is very close to my heart. The love continues to grow immensely. And if you're out there, Jim Hart, some people call you Jimmy. I heard that in Haida Gwaii. James Hart, the master carver. He is very dear to me, and for many reasons. And outside the museum stands his monumental bronze, The Three Watchmen, which I was lucky to see another cast in the National Gallery in Ottawa. But you've got a long relationship with this man, and recently as well, because I mentioned at the start, this was a book that is really important to the museum, but I think also may stand itself as a kind of, extension of your scholarly life. It is something that I think art historians can look at as well. I think it's more than just, what we might say is a kind of catalog in a museum. I think it has of the full breadth of James Hart, and it is, again, the title is Sinansu, James Hart, A Monumental Practice. So as you can't put a man like James Hart in one museum. It's not so simple like Dempsey Bob. He's got these monumental projects all over the world, some even in Sweden, France, and of course in Canada. And so the book is maybe the best way to show the full breadth of his life and career. So can we talk a little bit about this wonderful man?
When I first started talking about the book to Jim, we imagined it as an exhibition that could never happen. In the fact that, as you mentioned, he's got these major monumental works, one of which is here, the Reconciliation Pole here on the UBC campus.
Yeah.
And so the book is meant to operate at a number of levels. At a purely visual level, it's an exhibition of his monuments. And then it's a document of his commitment not only to his practice, but to the Haida in general. And that project had a rather auspicious start as well. Haida Gwaii opened back up, I'm going to say around 220, back to, they closed the island during COVID. And so as soon as it opened, I went there just to talk to Jim, and it wasn't about this book, it was about something else that never happened. And so I made arrangements, I go there, I find his house, I knock on the door. Rosemary, his partner, who I've become quite close with and who's a wonderful woman, answers the door, and I said, "Hi, I'm Curtis, I'm here to see Jim." And she said, "Oh, he's not here, he's in New York." And I went, "Oh."
Of course.
Because he couldn't get out of New York because of COVID.
Because of COVID.
And so I had already booked flights, hotels, and I thought, all right, okay. And so then I just kind of hung around their house and chatted with Rosemary, went down to Skidegate and sort of got to see the Haida Gwaii Museum was closed as well, but they have poles and things outside. And just got an initial feel, at least for Old Masset, and Skidegate and Dudgeangeets, to start getting a sense of what the book could be. And then, I think I was going there for 3 times a year over the course of 5 years, which, I would consider that a perk. And then just sitting down and interviewing Jim, hours and hours and hours of tape.
I feel a little envious of that. I'm just going to say.
Sure. And then gathering photographs. Like I fired through their family photo albums and just extracted so much material. And then reaching out to, the Olympic Museum in Switzerland because he's got a pole there. The King's summer residence in Sweden, he has a pole there, and gathering information, and then trying to think about how Haida art and indigenous practices on the Northwest Coast in general have, for most of the last century, been pigeonholed into this anthropological context and very hermetic treatments. And I wanted really to pull Jim's work out of that, what I thought was a delimiting discourse. And I hope that was achieved. And as I mentioned, alongside with this, brilliant visual presence. And I need to acknowledge the role that Figure One here in Vancouver, the publisher, played. They were absolutely fantastic. There was quite a bit of content to wade through. The other really, I think, or I hope, fascinating part about the book is I hired a fellow by the name of David Strongman to do drone photography of many of the poles. And that gave a real fascinating perspective. And so the book really arcs across his first major screen, a killer whale screen that's at the Royal BC Museum. And then it finishes on the memorial pole that he raised for his son, Carl, in the spring of 2023. And there was a potlatch for that. And so there's a sort of an art historical curatorial thread that runs through it, but there's a very personal story about Jim and his family and the Stastas Eagle clan, that he's the hereditary chief, Old Masset, Haida Gwaii in general. And so that was a real educational experience for myself. And getting to know Jim, Rosemary, Gwalaga, Mary, Leah, Jim's mom, who's since passed, and then other people. He has a memorial pole outside his house to his sister that passed away in the 90s. I was fortunate to be able to go across to a village across from Old Masset, a former village called Yan, to see just some of the very thin remnants of some of the monumental work that was there. And even here, there's a bronze, a smaller version of the Three Watchmen just off Kelchina Park. There's a similar bronze out front of the National Gallery of Canada. So I must say I have a very deep appreciation for Jim's work and his life.
And that has to make your job really lovely, because you get to have not only, the sort of behind the scenes connection with the art itself and everything that goes with it, but also with the artist, one-on-one. And you couldn't have painted a more beautiful picture of that relationship. And there's also, I should mention, in that book, there is a chapter written by James Hart himself. So you can hear his own words as well. So, but there's other exhibitions that we should quickly go through. Sure. Why don't we just talk a little bit about Curve, because this was really important. Women carvers on the Northwest Coast. These are, Indigenous women carvers that may have, we don't know, honestly, right? In the past, many of the art that still remains today that's carved by Indigenous carvers, some of them could have been women. We're not 100% sure, right? But we do know that there is an extraordinary body of work by women carvers, and you had the privilege of working with Dana Claxton on this exhibition.
That came together in a fascinating way, in the sense that in many respects it was an extension of the Dempsey Bob show. Frida Deasing, of Haida ancestry, who lived in Prince Rupert for a large portion of her life, was a key figure in teaching Dempsey Bob how to carve. Yeah. And he reinforced that over and over while we were putting together his retrospective. And I thought to myself, there's something here. This artist has been under-recognized and has played a major role. And so there was her work. Another artist that many people will be familiar with in Vancouver, Ellen Neal, who's got poles all around Vancouver, and masks and in collections throughout Vancouver. And so while I was thinking about, these artists from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and particularly Indigenous women that had been under-recognized, I had struck up a friendship with Dana Claxton, who many of you'll know is a really important artist, filmmaker, curator, educator. And she is also quite a collector. And so she had begun collecting a number of Indigenous women artists from the Northwest Coast, carvings in wood and argillite. And so in the midst of a conversation one day, we both realized that there was a really fascinating exhibition that could come out of this conversation, and that would arc from the 1960s to the present. And as you mentioned, let's say in the 19th, 18th, 17th century, while practices such as carving and weaving were definitively, mostly men carving, mostly women weaving, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't crossover and cross-pollination. However, again, in the anthropological treatment of practices like weaving and carving, anthropologists tend to categorize and not break categories or suggest that there's latitude. And so that was another important part of rethinking the practice of Indigenous women artists on the Northwest Coast. And it turned out to be immensely satisfying. Doreen Jensen, again, another artist that was active during the 80s. I got to know her daughter, and during a phone call, she said, "Oh, I still have my mom's tools." And for anyone that's familiar with carving, most carvers make their own tools eventually, and they're very important. And because they're styled for their hand, their style of carving, etc. And she said, "Oh, would you like them for the show?" And I said, "Absolutely." So she bundled them up, literally, and sent them to the museum. And then similarly, I had asked Dale Marie Campbell, who's a Taltan Tlingit carver out of Prince Rupert, if we could borrow a few of her tools, because she was working on a mask that wasn't going to be finished in time for the show. And so I said, "Could we show that piece in progress?" And she was nervous about that. And I said, "Well, we'll put it in a context where people understand that." And I said, "If you could also send some tools, that'll help with that concept." She said, "Okay, I'm going to put 4 knives in a leather glove." And she said, "Be really careful when they arrive because they're really sharp." And sure enough, the first thing I did was cut my finger when I was taking them out. But it was a really important show in the sense that, it, as I said, it arced from the 60s to the present. Many, I would say, emergent carvers such as Stephanie Anderson, Arlene Ness, Cheryl Alexander, some mid-career artists, and more senior artists. Susan Point, for example, was in the show. Marianne Nicholson was in the show. So these are really important artists, but bringing them together within the larger context of Indigenous women and their really key role in keeping traditions alive and vibrant, both in their communities and in a larger provincial and national context, was something that was, I hope, important. And Dana just did an incredible job in terms of, encouraging the artists, bringing them together, and making it so that this show is an important opportunity for each one of them.
And I just, you mentioned Susan Point, who is of the Musqueam Nation. Here we reside on Musqueam territory. The Audain Museum also, it's very important to the Audain to have people like Rick Harry, Hualacton, as well. And there are some up-and-coming artists from the Squamish-Lillooet nations as well. So it is another testament. It's something to think about visually when we think of the Three Watchmen. The base of the Three Watchmen it's two art pieces in one, right? So you got James Hart from the Haida Gwaii, and then you have Rick Harry right at the base,
as well as Levi Nelson.
Levi Nelson, as well. That's the name that was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that it was properly presented and it acknowledged the territory, the shared territories of the Squamish and Lillooet nations. And Levi did something really interesting. So there's a cutout ring at the base. Part of the imagery is, as you mentioned, by Halacton. The other part of the imagery by Levi is based on some pictographs that are found on Lillooet territory.
Yeah, that's really nice. Now, we are we are getting close to the end of our talk, but Curtis, I want to get a little bit of, behind the scenes about you. I want to so can you just, let's do that.
Okay.
We, the TNT, let's just bring something up quickly. So the TNT interviews are on your YouTube channel.
Correct.
Right. So that's something that people can see. And many of the artists that you've mentioned were interviewed. So that's something we can put a plug, and I can attach a link to that when I post the transcript of our talk.
Thank you.
But also what's something that I think is kind of fun. And I just thought, maybe we might be able to get into your head a little bit. So I've had the pleasure of seeing your office, which feels almost like a museum. Okay. Within a museum. Now, for listeners who cannot see it, what would you show us first?
There's a piece, a 3-paneled piece, which was created by Rebecca Belmore for her exhibition at the museum called Reservoir. And Rebecca is predominantly a performance artist. And so what she does oftentimes is she'll create a performance executed on a street, at a gallery, in various locations, and then she'll go back and restage it to be photographed. But when she restages it to be photographed, her sister is the stand-in for Rebecca. And so in this piece in my office that leans against the wall, it's her sister in a safety outfit standing knee-deep in water, because this show was all about water and how precious it is and the meaning of water. And she just left it behind. I mean, it's just vinyl pressed onto plywood. But that spoke to her work. Isn't about objects as much as it is about experience. So she doesn't have this preciousness associated with what she does. And I can only imagine that's why she left it behind. I'm happy to have it in my office, just because the light levels are such that I can't have pieces from the collection, but I can have what I refer to as remnants from all the different shows in different ways. There's a large white bulbous thing that sits on my table, which is Joseph Tisiga's brain that you can actually wear on your head, which I take great joy in having people wear. So there's all these bits and pieces of things that happened, or have happened rather, over the life of most of the museum, and particularly my tenure at the museum. So I just take it for granted because it's got quite layered over time. Along with my, we won Best Wedding Venue in British Columbia in 2021, so I have that prize. Along with a variety of other things.
Yeah, so I think we have very little time. Can you
Okay.
just give us a little snippet very quickly about this is a project that you're developing called the Klingit 4 Centuries of Art. It's something projected for 2028. And you just recently returned from Alaska with that wonderful man, Dempsey Bob. I know at least you were with him. I don't know for the entire duration. Yes, for the entire time. So yeah, your job is fun, Curtis. So, can you just give us a little snippet about why this is an important project for you?
Sure. Again, this happened on a trip that I took to Terrace, actually during the time of the Women Carver show when I was meeting some of the artists, and had lunch with Dempsey, and he said, "You have to do a Tlingit show next." And I went, "Okay." And I just kind of filed that. And then once the Jim Hart book was off the ground and it was, nearing completion, and the same with the Women Carvers, and I called Dempsey. I said, "You really want to do that Tlingit show?" And he's like, "Absolutely." And I said, "Well, you'll have to co-curate it with me." Dempsey is Tahltan Tlingit. And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Okay, what do we need to do to get this off the ground?" He said, "Well, we have to go to Alaska." And so in May, actually, we started in Seattle. Then we went to Anchorage, Juneau, Sitka, and Ketchikan. So Tlingit territory is predominantly the Alaskan Panhandle, but there are also Tlingit communities in or mixed Tlingit, Tahltan, Tsimshian communities in the interior BC, as well as the southern Yukon. And one thing that has happened consistently, and I think the best example is at the Canadian Museum of History, in the Grand Hall,
Yes.
there's a major house for the Kwakiwak, the Haida, etc., with the exception of the Tlingit.
Yes. And I was there as well recently.
Oh, so good.
So
you understand.
I understand.
And they're
Yeah.
sequestered in a corner without any house and rather dark lighting. And that's purely because there's this little dotted line and the fact that Alaska was sold to the United States by the Russians, I would say illegally, in 1867.
Yeah.
However, the Tlingit are just an essential part to the whole history of artistic production up and down the coast. And also bringing in that Canadian aspect to it, I thought made it even more important because the relations, the family, and overlap is constant. And so we started visiting artists and collections throughout Alaska and Seattle. We'll be going to New York to the American Museum of Natural History in the fall, as well as the Shot Ridge Collection at the University of Pennsylvania, and then continuing to meet with carvers, weavers, jewelry makers. And it was absolutely fantastic because Dempsey taught carving in Sitka and Ketchikan in the 80s, as instructed to do so by Frida Diesing.
Yeah.
So there was so many instances, like we're in a cafe in Ketchikan. This elderly lady came in and she broke down because she hadn't seen Dempsey in 25 years. So there were all these really special moments. Also, though, in Seattle, we met with Alison Bremner, just a brilliant Tlingit artist living outside our community. Nicholas Gallinen, who shows out of a major commercial dealer in New York, but lives between Sitka and Honolulu. And I'll be going up to Terrace this summer and doing a little road trip with Dempsey to all points between Terrace and Rupert and meeting with some Tlingit artists or artists of Tlingit ancestry. And Dempsey has really taught me how to see and what to look for. And so, I feel privileged to have what is now a 30-plus year relationship with Dempsey that keeps giving.
And a 30-plus year relationship with Canadian art
as well.
With the communities where it comes from. And it's a reminder for anyone that's just tuned in to go up to Whistler to see the Audain Art Museum. I can just think of this beautiful Chilkat blanket that we have from the Tlingit people that actually I would say rivals some of the other ones I may have seen, and I won't mention where. But I will say it's as pristine as anything could get. It looks like it just came out from the weaver's hands yesterday, and it's from the 1800s. So it's extraordinary. I think, Curtis, it's been lovely to have you, and I thank you for taking the time to come from Whistler to UBC to speak with me today.
I managed to get in a swim at Third Beach on the way.
Awesome.
So all good.
All good. I've been speaking with Dr. Curtis Collins, Executive Director of the Audain Art Museum here on the Blue Hour. If you would like to hear this conversation again, today's episode will be available through CITR on citr.ca, as well as on Apple Podcasts and soon on Spotify. A full transcript of today's interview, along with links to many of the books, exhibitions, and artists we discussed, will be available on my blog at thehourisblue.com. I am Farah Guerrero. Thank you for listening to the Blue Hour on CITR 101.9 FM in Vancouver and streaming worldwide at citr.ca. Until next time, take good care.